Peter's muted.
All right.
Present. Peter Pescatore.
Hey,
You're back. All right, so the next item on the agenda is minutes from May 19th, which I circulated earlier. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes from May 19th, 2021?
so moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All right, all in favor? Aye, Katie Dugan.
Aye, Tom Callahan. Sorry. We need a regular alphabetical order to
I know.
avoid.
It was-
Okay, I, Woody Chidick. I'll follow Tom.
All right, I'm in. Peter
You're
Pescatore.
in. Excellent. No, it was easier when you sit at a table and one person would start at one end and you sort of knew what to do when you're staring at each other on the screen. It's like, is the protocol upper left-hand corner? Like, I don't know. Anyway, all right. So next agenda on the item next item on the agenda is the comprehensive rezoning organization and redraft, which is the grant proposal that was submitted to the state. So I was going to share with the group this memo. So hold on one sec. All right. So I mean, Cassie and Tom have heard this kind of ad nauseum because we've covered this at Master Plan Implementation Committee. But there's a community one-stop for growth pre-grant application that was submitted on April 1st or thereabouts. And in May, the town got feedback regarding the 5 grants that were submitted as part of that pre-grant application process. The state has kind of aggregated some of their grant programs into these umbrella programs. So Community One Stop for Growth is a series of planning and permitting pre-construction kind of grants. It's different and separate from another program that you guys are probably familiar with, like MassWorks, or yet another program that we're all becoming familiar with around Complete Streets. But they kind of now group them into these umbrellas. And for the Community One Stop for Growth, you were able to submit up to 5 grant applications. And if you participated in the pre-grant application process, you got feedback from the state around which of the grants looked like they had the right scope relative to the specific underlying grant programs that were being funded. The 5 that were submitted were Elm Street Corridor Revitalization, our zoning bylaw recodification, which we've now changed to our comprehensive reorganization and redraft, downtown village revitalization, MBTA connectivity improvements, which really relates to 3A North engineering work to create connectivity from basically Sawyer Street all the way through the MBTA train station, similar to what's already in the TIP, and will enter a construction phase in late 2022 or 2023 for 3A South. And then last but not least was an AEC grant related to alternative energy battery storage on the 3A corridor. The feedback from the state was positive on the first 4. As it turns out, for the 5th, the Crocker Lane Depot, there wasn't a program that was matching up with the scope of that, that grant proposal currently. So the state suggested that that should be put on hold. The overall feedback was positive. The next step was to actually submit grant applications. And that really comes down to a question in town as to whether we think we have all the details and enough of the grant specifics ready in order to explain them and provide them as part of the broader grant application package. The town decided that the MBTA connectivity, which is 3A North, and the downtown village the downtown village revitalization were not quite ready. So they did not submit them this grant cycle, but they are still town priorities and will likely be submitted in the spring 2022 cycle for One Stop for Growth. The two that were submitted were the Elm Street corridor revitalization, and the second was the comprehensive redraft of the zoning bylaws. The Elm Street corridor was a $500,000 grant request, and that was for the 75% engineering work, which is going to follow the design phase that we're in currently with Weston and Sampson around the Elm Street corridor. And then for our zoning one, the grant was submitted for $75,000, which was the maximum for that planning and zoning grant category. So we have those two applications in.
Do you have those actual applications to see kind of what's required to put together for the grant request?
You know, I did not get the full grant applications, but I will ask Lauren for them. I'll do that as a follow-up and I'll circulate it to the group.
It'd just be interesting to see the level of detail and kind of what's required for that part of the process.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Katie, also, are you accurate here where you say we'll be notified October 2021 for FY22 funding? In 2 weeks, we'll be starting fiscal year 22. This would give us basically half a year to act on these grants if we get them.
It's just saying that it's going to be funded in fiscal 2022. Woody, I don't.
That can be carried forward. Then.
I believe they can be carried forward. I don't think that there's you have to spend it all by June 2022. I can certainly make that clarification point, but I don't think that is the case. But I guess the good news, as Woody just pointed out, is that we will hear decisions on this in October, which is ahead of special town meeting, which if we need in some cases to top off the grant with additional funding from special town meeting free cash flow as a one-time expense, we certainly have the opportunity to do that. So those are the two grants that are in process. You know, my thought process around kind of next steps as it relates to our zoning bylaw grant is that we're going to want to start to gather information and be ready so that by late summer, by September kind of timeframe, we know exactly what we're going to do when we get or don't get awarded the grant money. And I guess on my list was, you know, a couple things. One is, I think, doing some benchmarking regarding the full cost of zoning redraft and reorganization is probably merited. My gut says is that $75,000 isn't going to cover the full nut. Lauren had started to do a little outreach, and she had reached out to Bedford, which is obviously a larger town, but they had estimated their full recodification, which is similar to ours. It had both kind of the reorganization piece, but it was also incorporating master plan related zoning changes at $150,000 to $200,000. And then I had gathered a list of other communities that have undertaken this. Manchester by the Sea did something similar in 2020. Somerset did something similar in 2019. Arlington did something similar in, they started in 2018, and I think they just finished their work in 2020. And then farther back, Northfield had done this in 2015, and Duxbury had done it in 2013. So there were definitely some towns that we could reach out to in terms of getting some cost estimates and just understand a little bit better, you know, what their RFP proposals look like. So that was on my list, was to gather the cost and then the scope of their projects, but then also gather samples of RFPs. because eventually, should we get this grant and funding, we'll have to go through an RFP process to select a consultant to work with. And, you know, if we have the RFP basically ready, we can begin that immediately with Michelle Leary. It takes, I would say, 2 months from when you kind of submit the RFP, get responses back, analyze the responses. That's a quick turnaround in terms of an RFP under 30B, which is, I think, what we would need to do. And then the last thing is doing some more research. Cassie had already started it, and I had showed it to everybody at a meeting a while back, but Cassie had started a grid of consultants that she had found that, again, I think we'd want to vet and have an understanding of who we liked in terms of their work product and process with communities. Because generally when you do an RFP, you obviously have to do it as a public RFP, but you then specifically send emails to firms that you're interested in having respond to that RFP process. So you kind of seed the discussion, hopefully, with consulting firms that you would like to respond. Whether they do or don't is obviously up to them.
Katie, I believe Corey mentioned last night that they'd already had some conversations with our neighbors, including Situate. Did he say that last night?
I remember him talking about that in the context of sewer. I don't remember in the context of zoning, but it was a long meeting, so I could have missed it.
No, it would be interesting to hear kind of feedback referral for, is it Brovitz, the first
Can you turn your volume up?
Me, Woody?
Yeah, you're just a little light on volume, that's all.
Brovitz, the first consultant, I believe, is who works with Situate very closely.
Yeah, Brovitz was the one that under what you gathered in terms of municipal experience is did the Situate Greenbush zoning.
What is nice about the Situate bylaw is that it provides examples through visuals of kind of structures and massings. Something to think about.
Yeah. The other one that I noticed, and again, this was Arlington, was RKG. I've seen RKG a couple times on the zoning consulting side, just as a name that's kind of popped out in a couple different places as I've done various Google searches.
Who was
So
the company that had like a financial background spin to it? Remember we were in love with one of their presentations.
I can't remember who that was.
Can't remember either. Remember their presentation was very well thought out and very detailed. I'll have to look.
Yeah.
I don't know the Witten of the Horsley Witten group, but there was a John Witten 10 or 15 years ago that really crossed swords with a lot of local boards. Zoning and planning being two.
Same guy, same firm.
Yeah, you know, I put that note in there, Woody, that it was withdrawn. I'm not sure why.
He was very polarizing.
Okay.
That's just a
side note.
side note.
Yep. So I do think that there are some steps that we need to kind of proactively take over the summer around benchmarking cost and scope, beginning to kind of gather samples of RFPs that are out there for this kind of consulting work. And generally it's kind of cutting and pasting what you like and then adding in obviously the specifics for our proposal. And then some deep dives in terms of the actual firms that are out there so that we have a good sense of who we like, who we might want to avoid. Obviously it's part price as a 30B process, but you can engage and reach out to folks and ask them to respond to our particular RFP. And that would be smart if you want to get the firm or two that you're interested in to work with you. So that was the update on the the comprehensive zoning redraft and reorganization. I'm happy to take a crack at this, but if there's anybody else that has like an interest in working on this, let me know.
Katie, if I could just say, I made you co-host and I have been trying to promote Jack Creighton, but it won't let me for some reason. So I didn't know if you could try. I know that he can most likely hear us.
Okay, Jack, we apologize. All right, walk me through, where do I go?
So if you go into attendees and you roll over for more, and then you promote to panelists, I keep doing it. It says he's being moved over to panelist, and it doesn't. So if you go on the bottom, see participants.
Yeah, okay, oh, I see attendees, got it.
Yeah, and then you go over and you kind of toggle over under more.
Panelist. I just promoted him.
That's what it keeps telling me, but it doesn't go.
All right, Jack, we apologize. We're having technical issues.
Is everybody else promoted fine? So I don't know whether he wants to hang up and try to come back in.
Okay,
I did send a panelist invite to this town email as well.
okay, all right. So if there's anybody else who wants to join on the zoning grant bandwagon as a summer homework, people can just email me. All right, so next up on the agenda is a couple updates all around. We had harbor housing options and residential. And, you know, with residential, it was really sort of circling back to some of the conversation that we had with the planning board 2 weeks ago, and Cassie's done a deep dive on a couple areas. And housing options, it was really just an update from Woody and I about the preliminary meeting we had with the Affordable Housing Steering Committee. And then a harbor, I wanted to see if we could circle back to some of the information that we had looked at the beginning of April and begin to kind of crystallize some recommendations or recommendations specific to harbor zoning. Peter and his group has put out some ideas and some recommendations, but I don't think we've kind of crystallized it down. So I think today's attempt was to try and build some consensus and figure out what areas we're in agreement on and what areas maybe we need some additional work or we need to do some additional consensus building. So with that, I did pull together something and I had promised Peter to send it in advance and then I just ran out of time as usual.
I know the feeling.
Yes, exactly. All right, so let me go ahead and share this. And again, this is much more of a draft than what I did on the residential. So this is, feel free to chop this to pieces. All right. Okay. So the thought process is that we had 3 goal areas: residential, harbor, and housing options. And ultimately, we want to get to recommendations in all 3 areas so that we can obviously get them into the comprehensive redraft. So we've done part 1, which is residential zoning, and we have some follow-up, but we've got that underway. Part 2 is harbor. So again, the idea would be to go to the planning board with a similar set of recommendations and have a focused conversation just about the harbor. As it relates to, that's weird. It doesn't seem to be showing as well. Pieces of the presentation. So I'll do this. So one of the things that I noticed in going back, and I don't know if you found this, Peter, but I was kind of shocked at the lack of specificity when it came to harbor zoning recommendations. It really, I mean, the master plan, I went back and I looked at the first document that you, Jack, and Paul produced. I think it was back in like February. And I kind of went through what the underlying goals and actions were in our master plan, open space, and municipal plan. In the master plan, we basically give a nod to the harbor plan. In the open space plan, it's probably the clearest of all the mandates, which is, you know, protect the open space and preserve access and scenic beauty. And then we get to the municipal harbor plan, and to be honest, there weren't a lot of specifics that were calling out zoning directly. There was the goal of support public use and access to the harbor, which is similar to the open space goal, identify and improve landside and waterside activity. And then the one that specifically called out zoning was pretty wide in terms of update the zoning regulations within the harbor area to be consistent with the goals of this plan and the requirements of Chapter 91. This would include a reevaluation of the Waterfront Business District and the light industry zone. So unlike some of the recommendations in the master plan, which were pretty specific, like look at demolition delay bylaw, or look at land alteration, or, you know, analyze land use. To me, it's sort of just, when I revisited it, it struck me with the lack of specificity. So I don't know if there's any other reactions that people have to kind of like the broad guidance that we're getting from the plans.
Yeah, the harbor plan itself has several projects that are waterside, you know, the seawalls, the eelgrass, things like that. And, you know, it doesn't really, you know, that they don't really say much about landside development at all, because it wasn't in their charter. So they stick right specifically to the waterside issues and the implementation of that.
So the land side falls to us?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not, you know,
I mean, we did it.
that makes sense.
In the open space plan, we made the statement about why the town should protect the harbor, you know, for posterity. But it didn't get into specific zoning changes or anything like that.
I guess what it struck me with is that there's not necessarily from the plans themselves a clear problem statement of like fix this.
No, it's all for posterity. You know, it's all future. You know, we don't want to see a gray wall around the harbor of condominiums blocking off the harbor.
Well, that could be a problem statement or a potential problem, a statement of a
it wasn't stated, but that's the flip side of the general comments from the public that we, you know, codified in the plan, is that, you know, they'd like to have more access, they'd like to have the views preserved, you know, and they'd like to have more usage available for the, you know, for the harbor. So
zoning is going to facilitate that once we get some specifics.
it can.
Right. Well, otherwise it's not being addressed.
Right.
Right. I guess, again, so like it's kind of good news, bad news when I think about it. I mean, the good news is that the way the problem is framed gives us some leeway in terms of defining how we want to address access, views being preserved, and this whole issue around usage of the land side and, you know, commercial land side activity. But on the downside, again, I felt like it was kind of lacking a problem statement. So that was just one observation that I had as I was kind of going through things. I then started to pull together some of the facts like we did last time, just to kind of lay the groundwork for where are we with the data that we've collected on harbor zoning. And, you know, this is a map that just kind of, there's a more colorful one that fills in the zoning for these residential sections over here, but it's really distracting. So I actually,
in a nutshell, the blue area you see, the blue area at the Cove and then up along the Border Street is Waterfront Business. The green area on, which is Government Island, is RC. Okay, and there's no residential there at all. And then the Trendowitz area, the purple is light industry.
Yep.
And the arm going out is actually open space right now. So the two things that need to be fixed,
No, it's not.
yeah, it is. It's light industry, open space. The section, the Trendowitz section is light industry. The arm, that spit of land that goes out is open space. And the creek is open space behind Parker Ave. Parker Ave is RA. And so the Government Island and the Trendowitz property, which is light industry, they should both be waterfront business district. And that's the simple solution. That protects the areas that are most in danger.
So let's hold on that solution just for 1 second, because I do want to get through kind of the facts as we have them. So, you know, if you were laying this out to somebody who hadn't studied it before, it's the 7 zoning districts plus the 1 overlay that is what rings the access and the views of the harbor. The other piece of it, for people to understand, is that, you know, you can do a wider swath of defining what the harbor is, and Woody took a crack at this and, you know, identified 170 parcels that are in the harbor area. But the ones that are highlighted in blue are the ones that you see on the previous page. It sums up to 15% of the parcels that really directly impact the community's access and the view corridor to the harbor. You know, and that is largely the commercial, the commercial section. I mean, the rest of it is, as most of town, 90% residential, a little bit commercial, and 3% town or open space, which is just Government Island. The other, and I'm open to ideas. I couldn't come up with the right map to show this in any kind of detail, but this is just the point that the base flood elevation, when you look at the latest FEMA map, adds 8 to 10 feet to elevation in terms of flood abatement when you're discussing height. And I guess the one question I had for the group was, when I went back to the actual underlying table of area regulations, I only saw base flood elevation being added in the overlay district. I did not see.
Right, correct.
Okay.
But it's going to be required as a practical matter anyway.
Yeah, you can't do anything around the harbor because those abatement heights have been established, period.
But I guess, and I'm sorry, I was just I was getting maybe a little bit technical, but, you know, in our table of area regulations, we call out specifically the base flood elevation plus 35. But if you look at
the overlay district only.
For the overlay district only, but if you look at Waterfront Business, or you look at light industry, which are the two others that are most impactful, it says 35 feet maximum. And
Right.
so
And it
where
doesn't say anything about flood abatement.
So does that mean it's on top of the 10 feet?
Well, that's constructively the interpretation that people would move to based on the overlay district.
Yeah, so it might apply to LI, light industry as well, or
Sure.
in time?
Well, you know, it's in the overlay district, so it's precedent.
They're not going to be
Unless
allowed
we
to.
change it.
but I don't think,
Nobody is going to be allowed to build district. So you know, in the
Mhm.
flood area. But nobody's going to be allowed by a lender, probably state regulatory authorities would not let you build under base flood elevation.
But I
Say
guess
that
my-
again, Tom. Not allowed
I
you to
don't- I don't
build on
think-
what?
Underneath base flood elevation. So I
Oh,
think
I
base flood,
see.
base flood elevation is the effective bottom of any project.
I
Not-
don't agree. I don't agree.
Well, fine, go try to get a loan.
Oh,
building-
no, we can deal with this in a way that
You have to
probably
have,
get some legal advice.
it's legislated that you have to have that abatement height, okay?
Right.
You can change what the absolute height is, and it would include that abatement.
Right. So you could have 25 feet height in this district,
That's
proposed district, and that would bring you back up to 35 if that's what you wanted.
I'm sorry, I'm just trying to get to the root of like what legislatively, I understand your practical realities that you're voicing, Tom, of lending and state regulatory, but I guess my question is, do we need to change our table of area regulations so that for waterfront business, we specifically say that it's on top, whatever we determine the max height is on top of BFE, base flood elevation? Because right now we've got an inconsistency in our table of area regulations, is all I'm
Yes,
saying. We call
we
it
do.
out in the Harbor Village business, we call it out in the overlay, but we don't call it out in the waterfront business.
Right. But as I said, because it's in the harbor overlay district, there'll be strong
Well,
consideration that it should, if somebody else wanted to do that. Now, yes, I agree with
no,
Tom.
but the light industry is not in the overlay district, is it? The overlay district is really pretty
It's just
narrow.
at the code. It's just at the code.
Yeah.
It's just,
What I'm saying is though, that it's also waterfront business district. So it has a dual designation.
but just for the harbor business, I guess I'm just concerned. I just want to make sure that when we make a change, we're precise about it. And it feels to me like we've got one technique for dealing with it in the overlay, and we do not have an analogous technique in the waterfront business, nor do we have protections, when we're talking about potentially this residential. Do we need some kind of language in our overlay that requires building to take into account base flood elevation? Do we need to call it out specifically?
I think we do. And I wouldn't, Tom, I follow you in a way, but I would never say never. I mean, somebody could come up with a design where you've got a building that's 35 feet on top of 10 plus a peak, and all of a sudden we're at 50 feet.
Can I say something?
It may be ugly, but
Yeah.
Well, that's the problem with the current HVBOD, is that it didn't address height. And
Right.
That's not-
we are going to get a massive building that I still think nobody's expecting, and they're all going to scream when they see it.
But that's done.
I know that. All right. So I
no, but
also,
we don't
I
want any
also-
more of those.
look,
Right.
I don't personally.
I don't.
No, but we have changes in ownership going on, and I can assure you we will have changes in zoning proposed in connection with these changes in ownership. And I drafted a bylaw for the fall that addresses all of these topics. And can we discuss the concrete? Because until we write a bylaw, all of this is just academic discussion. And we have projects that are going to control the agenda and come before we do if we keep just talking about it. I drafted a proposal to change the height in the harbor. I drafted a proposal to change the zoning in the harbor. Can we discuss that? It just seems like it's ignored, and
Tom, it's not ignored. I was getting to it. So if you guys wanna hop ahead, I'm happy to go. The three concrete proposals that I've heard.
No, Katie, let's stick with your line of march here.
Jesus Christ,
Well-
sorry.
No, come on.
I've got a
We'll
zillion
get
other-
there. We'll get there.
I got a zillion other things to do. We meet during the business day. I'm sorry, it frustrates me, and let's just get to the point of making the changes in the bylaw we need to make. That's all my point. Doesn't have to be my change. It just needs to be a change. I'll be
Okay.
quiet.
Well, I'd like to hear Katie take us through her logic flow at any rate, because we're going to end up at where we want to be.
So I guess the next observation is one that we already know, which is we have 4 commercial zones and 1 overlay district, which are ringing, and they all have different table of area regulations. So your point is the one I was trying to make, Tom, which is we need consistency here, and we don't have it today. We have Waterfront Business, which has one set of setbacks versus light industry, which has another set of setbacks. We have, it's hard to see, but the height change here, again, we have the inconsistency, at least in my mind, that one calls out BFE, the other one does not. The other districts do not call out BFE. So part of it is the table. It would be simpler, and I think this is the argument you're making, Tom, to go from 4 down to 1 in terms of making changes to a table area regulations that create a consistency in terms of what is going to be the end redevelopment. And the same is true for the table of uses, where we've got a checkerboard of by right and special permit uses that differ across the commercial districts. You know, the one that kind of jumped out to me was retail, in that retail stores, which seems like a pretty benign potential development use of the harbor, is allowed by right in downtown business, the overlay district, and light industry, but is a special permit request in waterfront business, which just as quite strange that for waterfront business you could have no retail stores. Or it was a special permit, it wasn't by right. So again, I think the point is that we've got 4 commercial districts, and we've got inconsistencies between the table of area regulations and the table of uses. And the simplest way to ensure consistency in terms of the outcome is to reduce that down to a single district. And how you go about that is kind of the question. So the 3 things that I came up with were addressing height, as we were beginning to discuss, harbor rezoning, and we've got 2 proposals on the table. And then we've got addressing the table of uses. And I guess at the same time, it's also the table of area regulations. So I would suggest that, Tom, if we want, we can hop right to your proposal in terms of height and have a conversation about that. And then we can flip back and have a conversation about the harbor rezoning. Does that make sense?
Yeah, fine.
All right.
My only comment, when I was thinking of a 25-foot height limit here, I had kind of forgotten, I must say, about base flood elevation being another 10 feet. I was thinking, in fact, that the maximum physical height of future buildings or additional buildings would be lower than the present, not the same as.
Okay.
And that's what a 25, as you know, 25 plus 10
Yep.
would still give us a pretty tall building, even before we get to the, do we measure it at the peak or not, which I think we should, but I don't know. To my mind, I had in my head the Duxbury bylaw, which is an absolute 25 feet from the ground.
Yeah, that's where I am. I'm in favor of an absolute height, which includes any base flood elevation requirement.
Right. So all you'd have to do is change the first sentence to say 25 feet, including base flood elevation, whatever that may be.
That's fine. I agree.
Call it absolute or including, I guess it'd be better to say including base
Yeah.
flood elevation.
Yeah. No, Anybody have a problem with that conceptually?
Well, it says a one-story building is all you can build on top of a, you know, on top of,
Well, you could have
Yeah,
2
just-
stories.
well, maybe, it'd be,
Maybe, I don't know. You're right. But
whatever, but that's fine, as far as I'm concerned.
All right.
sure, drive around.
I don't disagree with it, but then think through the implications of that as far as
Okay.
uses. If, for example, what I proposed here, and I'm not wedded to it, it's just a proposal of what I think is the reality for future development in the harbor, is that if you can't be assured of 2 stories, you're cutting out mixed use. And if that's okay, if you don't want to see more mixed use and more condos in the harbor on the waterfront, you know, where the restaurant is, that's fine. I'm all in favor of it, but if you can't assure us 2 stories, you are going to preclude residential uses on the second floor.
The public comments that came in from all of our forums for our open space, and I think the master plan, all from the public side said that they wanted to have open vistas and more public access. So I would agree that, you know, we shouldn't have 2-story buildings around the harbor. It should be-
Let me just play the devil's advocate from the property owner's point of view, is that that's all well and good for the public to say that, but they never put up with their money to buy the property. These are valuable properties that people are sinking a hell of a lot of money into, particularly if they have to redo wharves and seawalls. And, you know, the argument is going to be, why can't I get more maximum use out of the property? Otherwise, the town should put up and buy it.
Well, you know, Tom, though, I mean, just a counter, I mean, we're playing devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
Nobody's forcing these people to invest $2, $3, $4, $5 million. And the only way they can justify that is to build a 45-foot tall structure. I mean, you know, drive around Hull. I mean, Jake's isn't a 2 or 3 story thing. And you go down to Duxbury, there you don't have 2 and 3 stories. Most
Yeah,
of them.
no, I get that.
With a housing exception down there.
I get that. And I think, like, you know, when we heard at the HVOBD presentation, you know, they were kind of poo-pooing the potential for commercial development and restaurants being successful in the harbor, and I don't agree with them. I think retail and restaurants could succeed in that harbor.
And I think a story and a half or a story or whatever structure could succeed.
Yeah,
Look,
all right, well, that's fine. I'm just saying that I have no problem with the height being that way, but it just then has implications as to what uses will be.
Well, there's a difference between using it and then optimizing the investment.
Yeah.
This isn't, you could optimize the investment by not having bylaws at all, I suppose, but
and
I mean, I
then
know
we'd-
that's not your point. I don't mean
Yeah,
to.
no, I know.
Then we'd have
about
Situate
that.
Harbor with the grotesque condominium developments that has crushed any public parking in the area. It's congested and it blocks off the whole harbor.
Yeah, that's it. And it also saved Front Street.
Well-
I think those are integral to the rebirth of Front Street, but, you know, we can argue back and forth about it. I'm just preparing us, if we go to town meeting with this, just be prepared for that.
You might have a couple of people who say, I'm not optimizing my investment, but you'd probably have a couple of hundred people, to Peter's point, saying the harbor belongs to everybody in a sense. It is
Yep.
iconic, it's emblematic.
All right.
So the question I just have for context, we're really talking about impacting a couple specific buildings currently that could be developed. It's Atlantica, the old salt house, and it's the
Shipyard and the Lobster Pound.
lobster pound. Yeah. You know, just as context, does anybody have a sense as to Atlantica? I mean, it's a 1-story building currently.
Right.
Um,
And it
Is
would be, it would be grandfathered anyway.
But it's
Jan-
also, it's in the V zone. It had to go very tall, and I don't think it would be allowed. I think what I've heard before is that would have to stay the way it is. Otherwise, it has to go up by 12 feet because it's in the velocity zone.
Well, 12 feet above base flood, right?
Right. So
That's
you're talking
22 feet
above
above
what
high
it is.
tide. or,
Right. And I just want to go back to, just to give as a layman, that I grew up in Hingham, live in Cohasset, and live in Situate. And in my opinion, Situate has the most vibrant harbor, and it's where people go to hop around to start with. And I agree that the CVS store is hideous and was approved by their design review board. But if that could ever come down, I think that there's two sides of the story as far as what people consider vibrant, which is a bad word, which is used in our overlay.
So you're advocating for height. In some cases, height creates vibrancy.
Some cases because it's mixed use. So those ugly buildings and so like CVS is ugly. I don't mind I've been in and have friends that live in those condos, and I think they're attractive, but I think it's nice to have the mixed use. There's legal apartments above all of those spaces or offices. And many of the people we work with, like Heidi Condon and people like that, they all have offices in Front Street and love where they work. So it's just, I think it's also, we just have to find a happy medium and probably, do some focus groups or get some, but like you said, there's not a lot of structures.
Yeah, but our main street is down in the village.
I know, but we're talking about the harbor. So
yeah, and I wouldn't rule out what happens to the Oaks at some future point. I mean, that's a hell of a lot of real estate that could be, and that building that we all know, I think is iconic, the brick building, I mean, you might just tear it down and develop the whole, it's a big piece of property.
Yeah, but I'm not proposing changing the residential zoning of that lot, so that might limit what can happen there.
Not the height.
No, not the height, you're right.
Okay.
Well,
So we've got.
But we're mixed minds here, I guess.
no, I hear what you're saying. I left that property alone for a reason, but the height wouldn't change, correct?
I agree with, my inclination is the 25 feet max, including the base flood elevation, but I agree with Jen that, ultimately this needs to be tested with the community. Because ultimately we're going to need the support of the community in order to make this change. And it will impact the redevelopment of Atlantica, Old Salt, and the Lobster Pound, which are now owned by one individual, correct?
No,
No, I think,
no,
No, not the boatyard and
they're owned by Tom Sullivan.
I thought I heard that Tom Sullivan did buy Atlantica. No,
Yeah, he bought Atlantica.
He did.
well, keep in mind, Atlantica and the Salt House are two different owners.
yeah, they're two
Oh.
different addresses, and they plan to operate independently.
I'll take them in the rain.
All right, so Sullivan owns Atlantica and the Lobster Pound.
The McGoldrick people own sorry, you're right. He owns Atlantica and the Lobster Pound area.
And CHI owns the Salt House, and then you've
Right.
got Trendowitz, which is,
Well,
You
then
know,
just-
there's another way to handle this. Let's just stay with as a stalking horse or whatever, the 20 feet, including base flood elevation. Any deviation, don't make it a variance, make it a special permit. The planning board could grant a special permit for additional height if something is attractive and not, I mean, it's very hard to legislate everything. And
Well-
maybe that would, satisfy some people that there's at least a responsible board that will look at exceptions to the rule. I don't know.
One other thing, Woody, to follow up on that too, and kind of follow up on what Jen was starting to say, it could be where if you allow a second story, it could be a lesser percentage of the first floor. That way it would kind of automatically make them cascade it back a little bit. So kind of eliminate the billboard effect, if you would, there. So that might be
Okay.
something to think of anyway.
No, it's a good idea. And then the planning board could consider the overall design and impact on that area.
we have design guidelines for the harbor.
Right, but I mean these could all be, modernized or whatever, or left alone. I mean, I don't know, but
Is there a way to protect that
I'm sorry, is this Cassie again? Why can't I hear her?
Can you not hear me?
I mean, I can barely hear you.
It might be your mic, Cassie, because we could hear you at the beginning. I don't know if there's any sort of.
You guys hear me now?
You might need to, it's okay. It's not
We'll
great.
be quiet.
I'm just gonna say, is there a way to protect that structure so that at a minimum it stays a 1-story as opposed to open space and parking in the future?
Could you explain a little more?
I thought that we had heard whispers or some inkling that that Atlantica could be torn down and be used for parking for other businesses. I just feel like that would be detrimental to, you know, if we didn't have some type of structure there, such as Atlantica or another business operations, and just seeing a parking lot or open space there.
Let me turn to John Hallen. I have an idea, John, that Atlantica is going to have to come down anyway. The issue is, what do they replace it with, if anything? You can't do much renovation because the law, the Chapter 91 or whatever, says you can put, what, 75% of its assessed value back into it.
Yeah, my fear is that that gets torn down and just becomes parking. I don't know, way to safeguard that.
Why?
I thought that we had heard that at some point, that that was the.
I know, but what, to the extent the town wants more open space and views, what's the problem with that?
Personally, I would love Atlantica to stay in business or some type of restaurant on the water.
Certainly.
John, what do you think is going to have to happen to Atlantica? I mean, could it be renovated, or is it going to have to be taken down and replaced, if anything, if even that?
What address was that again, Moni?
Yeah, well, what's your take or assessment of what can be done with Atlantica? Can it be repaired and renovated, or is it going to have to, for economic reasons, come down and be rebuilt, or not? Maybe not rebuilt at all, but the issue is Atlantica could it stay, or is it going to have to go?
Well, it would probably, if it got torn down, it would probably have to be elevated to be above the floodplain.
Yeah.
So that would be one step. So if they did more than 50% of the value of the building, they'd have to elevate it.
Now, what the value of the building is what? I mean, basically, on what basis?
Well, the assessed value can kind of start there, or an appraised value. But again, I think I'll have to look at the map again, but I think Atlantica to the right side is in the floodplain, whereas the left side is in a lower floodplain, if you will. So if they did any significant work or tore it down, they'd have to raise it to comply. So, not having the exact elevations, I wouldn't know, but they'd probably be, at this point, they'd probably have to either keep what's there or replace it completely.
But to Cassie's point, could you possibly just restore it? Or does 50% of its assessed value get you nothing?
No, it gets you there. Then again, if you can also have an appraiser come in and work out those numbers too. So you have some leeway in there.
Oh, okay. All right. So it's possible.
Yes.
I mean, I guess my question, I mean, ultimately, part of me says that we shouldn't be legislating the outcome of Atlantica. We should be, we should be legislating the dimensional requirements. Again, I can see value in what Cassie's saying. I can see value in people wanting to potentially tear down and rebuild, although that sounds like it has a challenge of having to address the base flood elevation in the velocity zone if you chose that option versus just reconfiguring the existing building. But ultimately, we're not going to legislate that. So I think it just comes down to, if we say something like 25 feet over base flood elevation and Atlantica has 12 feet, that it has to deal with in a tear down scenario, they're being left with economically not being able to tear down because they could only rebuild, 13 feet.
Or they would just do a parking lot.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see how you make money from it, but it's like awfully expensive, like parking lot rate to pay back on that one.
No, the town would have to do a taking.
I guess it's just 25 feet. If you take into account 12, it starts to get severe.
Yeah.
Limiting. I'm not putting a.
But well, the thing, we don't have to decide today. Think about what I've suggested though about allowing deviations or exceptions to the rule via a special permit process. The other thing I would love to see the town do, it, generally speaking, not just for this property, is to reinstate a design review board, which many towns have, and we used to have one that was fairly active. It doesn't exist, I don't think, anymore, but they were an offshoot of the planning board. I mean, they worked with the planning board, but they had trained architects and designers on it. And maybe those two things could help ensure that whatever goes in there, I mean, we can't do the economics necessarily, but whatever goes in there is harmonious with the harbor as it should be. I don't know.
I'm more comfortable with the special permit exemption so that you allow a discussion about the economics of redeveloping that site.
That's a good idea.
So, some of this, so it seems like there is a majority view of the group that having a fixed height, including the base flood elevation of 25 feet is the first proposal that we'd like to put forward. I guess if people are comfortable, I'd love to get just a quick vote to sort of see if we're there on a fixed height. We don't have to agree on the 25 feet, but for now, let's just call it 25 feet. So
something including above base flood, including base flood elevation.
Yeah, so max harbor height, including base flood elevation, is the recommendation. I'm just going to poll people. Those in favor, aye. Katie Dugan.
Woody Chidick, aye.
Tom Callahan, aye.
Pescatore, aye.
Tom Callahan, aye.
Jack Creighton, aye.
Sound
Those
like you're-
opposed? Cassie, go ahead. I mean, we're all friends.
No, I cast Malatesta.
Okay. All right, so we're all in favor of a max height. I think the next,
Including the base flood elevation.
Yes, exactly.
including BFE.
I just asked the question though in the chat is, do we know what the highest base flood elevation is in the harbor? Does anybody know that off the top of their head?
It's 10.2 feet above, well, at least where the Harbor Inn is going, or the condos rather.
Right, but like if the
It goes down to 9 feet if you get farther out of the harbor. But Peter, you'd know, but I mean, it's a foot, one way or another.
Yeah, I'm just like the example of Atlantica saying, well, what if it was 12 feet? They only get 13 feet of building above it. Do we know 12 feet is the highest anywhere at any given point?
I don't know the specifics of
All right.
each area in the harbor.
I think well, all right, that would help knowing.
But the so-called impact zone has the highest, and that's right where Atlantica is.
Yeah, that's an open,
Because the flood comes right down the channel, right at Atlantica.
So
Is Atlantica the only property that's in a V zone in the harbor?
No,
So can we document this? I don't think this.
yeah,
is-
it's
Yeah, we need to just,
state, it's a state program, Chapter 91 kind of thing.
we have flood.
yeah, you might get, if you wanted a simple answer. I mean, I'm sure John Cavanaro would do it for nothing, but he knows.
Yeah.
where, you know, every inch of that harbor, what the flood elevation and things
Yeah,
are.
all right. I mean, we should know that.
There's a table for the whole circumference of the harbor.
I think we have flood maps in town hall somewhere.
So, Peter, can I put that on your working group's to-do list to get us kind of,
Just get the base flood elevations.
Yeah, and how it varies from one
Yeah, okay.
property to another, I guess.
Because that'll tell us what would be the appropriate number to put in, whether it's 20 or 25 or 30, you know.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah, I'll dig that out.
thank you. I think the next kind of conversation is around rezoning the harbor area. And because again, we just talked about a max height, including BFE. Now, what do you apply that to? And there's really two proposals out there. So just to refresh everybody's memory, this is the current zoning. Visualize that. And then this is what Peter and the working group have proposed, which is, this does not change. This is the Oaks, remains RC. There are 2 town parcels here that get rezoned. Plus there's a third one that's owned by, I forget who the party is. They're getting rezoned to open space. Peter, I don't believe you are recommending addressing the overlay district, leaving that as is currently.
Well, I don't think you can.
Okay.
You know, it's been approved, it's in process. You know, you can't defund them. I mean, you can't take away the right for them to build right now.
Yep.
I don't think legally.
And then from here, we're talking about waterfront business.
Right.
There are 3 parcels here that
That's town.
it's actually not town.
No, it's private.
Private.
Is that private?
Yeah, George McGoldrick and Peter Roy or Stasco rather each have rights to a dock there.
Yeah. And
Oh,
I'm
good.
suggesting that gets rezoned open space.
Well, that would be a taking.
It would be.
Okay.
The town would have to buy those lots then. Or take them and, you know, compensate the owners.
Because right now they're zoned.
Well, that's where the seawall is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah, right, yeah.
I mean, there's
understand.
virtually there's
No land there.
because it came to the zoning board. There is no land on the water side really.
Right. It's just the seawall and they have rights to put a pier out.
Put a pier out, yeah.
Okay. But that's, you know, they'll have to forego those rights if we rezone it.
Well, there's another issue, not a cost issue, but one of the proposals to make a usable pier goes pretty far into the harbor, interfering with the fishermen's dock as well as access to the Gulf River. I mean, you know, you start going more than 20 or 30 feet.
Yeah.
You're interfering with the flow of boats. Not clear that they could get Chapter 91 approval.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Chapter 91 comes in at that point.
I mean, nobody's tested it, and we don't have to deal with that, but I mean, something probably should be done there.
Yeah.
Well, currently they're zoned RB. Question is, do we want to propose rezoning them open space? But as you're suggesting, that would be a taking.
I'd like to go with whatever proposals make sense to us, and if it gets shot down or gets modified, fine, but I'd like to have sort of an exciting, bless you, an exciting vision or something that really makes, you know, sense and is inspiring. And if the town doesn't want to do the taking or it's offensive to people, then leave it alone. But
Yeah.
anyway.
Then you've got the Lobster Pound, which is waterfront business. You've got Government Island, which is currently zoned open space.
No, it's zoned RC.
It is?
It is not.
On the map I have, it is.
Gee,
Wait a minute, what is it? Which property?
he's saying the Government Island is zoned RC.
I'm going to bring up what I got from
I mean, I got the map.
Yeah, the Government Island is zoned RC, and the peninsula at the end of Trenswitz's property is zoned RB.
Right.
But Government Island is RC,
Yeah,
although it's town land, open space, it
Yeah.
it looks like.
Its district is RC.
Yeah, okay, I mean.
And that's why it needs to be changed to waterfront business, and everything that's there, you know, the lobsterman's pier, I mean, the fisherman's dock, you know, that's town. The sailing club is a nonprofit. The lightkeepers is a nonprofit, you know, they can both exist on that, and the harbor.
Okay,
master-
so it's an RC district owned by the town. That's why it's green but stippled.
Right.
Correct.
Okay. And then the open space
should
is
be-
the bright
yeah,
green
It
stippled.
should be either, you know, it should be either municipal property or waterfront business. And waterfront business would accommodate everything that's on there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You know, and the commercial fishermen would be covered, you know, they would be perfect for what that would be.
Okay. Guess I missed that subtlety. I was reading green as all open space, but seeing it now.
The Kelly Green is open space.
Yeah, this part
Okay.
there.
Yeah, the purple is Trendowitz, and this spit of land is, well, it's all RB, but that's actually water where the RB is, just that arm that goes out that you can see outlined.
Yep.
You know, that should be open space or something.
I
And
can't
the
find-
light industry should be changed to waterfront business.
Yeah.
So
look
if
Yeah.
you change Government Island and the light industry to waterfront business, you make it blue,
Mhm.
then you're done. And you make the arm, that marshland that goes out there, I don't think it's usable, but you make it open space.
Sure. Yeah, and a big tide, I mean, most of it floods.
Yeah, exactly.
So Peter, so just to kind of summarize for the group, you're proposing that this stippled green change to blue,
Right.
this purple change to blue, which is waterfront business, and this arm, which I can't find for the life of me in terms of what the parcel ID number is, change to open space.
Because it's underwater most of the time.
Yeah, I still can't find the parcel, but that's.
And then go over to Margin Street, and that little town dock should also be WB, I think,
Well, there's
or open space.
the town-owned piece right here, which is zoned R.
It's open space.
Oh, okay.
No, this isn't open. Is that open space?
Yeah, it is. It's open space.
Now
So
it's-
Kate,
That little.
Kate,
that
on the,
little-
On the parcel ID
RC,
map.
actually.
on the parcel ID map, I think it's labeled as 37 Parker Ave.
These two pieces right here are RC, and this one. Wait.
Oh, goodness.
God,
Katie,
the hound is out.
oh, Katie, I have made you the host. I have to run and figure out, Woody, we will have to meet live tonight. I have to go figure that out.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm gonna, Katie, I'll call you, catch up. I'm sorry, everyone, that I have to leave, but I gotta figure it out.
These three
We
parts.
will have to wear masks.
No.
Okay.
All right, I'll see you all soon.
I
Jen.
Bye.
Alrighty.
When I'm done.
Parcels are currently zoned RC. These two, these are town-owned RCs. It's the same, it's the analogous as the.
Yeah, okay. But it seems to me they both ought to be treated alike, whatever that is. If you're gonna make one blue, make the other blue or not, but
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question is, do we
Yeah,
want to change these blue?
well, Peter, what do you think?
I hadn't really even considered those, frankly.
I
You
think,
know, they're right up from the motel along it's not part of the,
Not part of the motel,
not part of the Roy.
Roy Estate? No.
No, on the parcel ID map, it's labeled as 0 Margin Street.
Hmm.
So one.
And
so
if somebody owns that?
yeah,
No,
it's
the
one-
town.
Town? Oh, then just make it municipal.
Well, this piece right here is owned by Higgins. And these two parcels this parcel right here is owned by the town of Cohasset. And this is the town dock. This is where the town dock is.
Just make it, just make that municipal. I mean, there is a municipal, like where the kiosk is, right down from the Salt House.
Oh, yeah, the John Smith Pavilion.
Yeah, that little pavilion, that's municipal, make those municipal.
But they're
And
not.
and if you're gonna do anything with these, you make them municipal, but it'll be a taking, so you'll have to pay them for their rights.
Who you pay?
Whoever has the rights along Border Street here.
So I don't think municipal is a zoning district. It
No,
is
Not yet.
no, it's not a district. So like we're confusing two things. We're confusing ownership and
Well, if the town owns them, then you don't have to do anything.
Well, all right, but I would like to see most of this be waterfront business.
Yeah.
And regardless of who owns it, if the town owns it, there's even less that can be done to it.
Right.
So-
But still,
Yeah, make it as far as I'm concerned, everything along the waterfront ought to be waterfront business.
okay, so this
Yeah.
so town docks is waterfront business, and then the small parcel, which is owned by Higgins, is also waterfront business.
Yeah, it doesn't infringe on his rights. He still can do something with it, but it may be too small to do anything with.
So the question on these three parcels right here
Yeah.
mhm.
that are owned by Stasko, McGoldrick, and who's the third? Massa. They're currently zoned RB. Do you change them to waterfront business?
Yes.
Yeah,
Why not?
I mean, there's no real property there.
Okay.
It's
I
just
think,
right. It's just a right. And, and a pier would conform with the waterfront business use.
okay, so the
If you put
concept,
some sort of a wharf out there, so people can fish off it. I don't know what they do, but
So right now, Katie, it's zoned as 132 undevelopable land.
that's the land use code. The underlying zoning district is
R30,
RB.
RB.
Yeah.
Yeah.
These three parcels are RB. So essentially, we've got a ring of blue, changing blue here, leaving this alone. I
yeah.
think there's a parcel right here, which this is the town.
Is that the pavilion?
Yeah, that's the pavilion, the John Smith Pavilion.
Again, do you change that to waterfront business? It's town owned, so you can do what you want with
Yeah, you
it.
can do it, yeah.
You've got blue, change these three RBs.
And then their rights could still be
Reserved.
used because, putting a pier out is a waterfront business.
And then you've got Government Island changing to waterfront business, and you've
Yep.
got light industry changing to waterfront business, and
Yeah.
this open space. Okay,
That makes a lot of sense to me.
Tom, I know you have a slightly different vision. For
No, it's not a slightly different vision. It's taking, what I wrote, again, for the possibility of the fall, is change all of this stuff to a single district. And I called it the Harbor District, something new. I don't care if it's waterfront business or harbor, but I would prepare it for harbor because in the next step that will come later is changing the table of uses. And because we've discussed how there's a lot of antiquated and uses listed for the harbor, and we're not ready, I don't think, to tighten that down yet. But there's still a couple of properties on the land side of Elm Street that are zoned village business or downtown business, and they should be included as well. And I wouldn't get into the open space. I would just make everything along the waterfront, other than the Oaks, either a harbor district, a single harbor district, or a single waterfront business district. Include the commercial properties on the land side of Elm Street, that are remaining. Think about the Legion, that's in an RB district, but I'm not proposing including it, but it's a commercial use, obviously. And then that plus height will help us prepare for what new owners might be planning in the short term. And then we can revisit the idea of what uses we might want to target at different sites as step 2.
I think the only,
So Peter and I fundamentally don't, the approach doesn't disagree. It's just the name and making sure we include the land, the commercial properties on the land side of Elm Street, which is like 97 to 99, I think, or 97 to 101.
it's these right here. But they're wrapped up in right now in the.
No, they're not the ones that he doesn't own. The small building to, if you're looking at it from the waterfront, the small building to the left of McGoldrick's project is not in that harbor overlay district. That
Okay.
small little commercial office building there, and neither is the Legion, and the Legion's in a residential district. But I think there's still that one little area of downtown or village business that remains down there.
Okay, hold on one sec.
And I think if we make it clear that everything is waterfront business with a change in height, we can deal with whatever might come after fall town meeting. Whatever proposals for reuse might come. And then we can look at the table of uses when we're doing the more wholesale change of the bylaw, because the table of uses needs to be cleaned up everywhere and all over town. It's got too many things listed on it. We can do that later, but I think we can, Woody's board and my board can deal with waterfront business if we have to for any redevelopment proposal that comes forward. And the bylaw.
Yeah, you may just want to call it the waterfront or the harbor, but
Yeah, it
maybe it's just the waterfront district.
Yeah, it doesn't matter either way. It just, the third part of the proposal, which I had proposed expanding the mixed DHV BOD, I'd take that out. I would take that out completely right now, because especially if we change the height the way we're talking. So 2 changes to just consolidate the districts and change the height, and I think we'll be all set for the short term.
I think the only thing that I'm struggling with, Tom, is on the land side. I think that there's more caught up in the existing Harbor Village business overlay. Like, I believe, and I went through this like literally.
Well, that's fine. If it is, it is. I mean, the way I wrote the bylaw was assuming those 3 properties were not, but if they are, the idea that the new waterfront district would include whatever's in the HVBOD will cover that. So that's fine.
Yeah, so when I went through this, the CHI across the street is this one right here. It's 87 Elm. There's another parcel, there are 2 parcels next to it that are owned by this gentleman that are 91 and 95. I mean, they're like minuscule. They're 0.04 and 0.06.
Right. It's that little gray 1-story, or no, it's actually 2 stories. I think it has an apartment above it. It was a candy store for a little bit. Now I don't know what's in there. But
there's actually one, these are actually zoned. 391 means that there's nothing on it. 325, I forget what that is. And then there's this little piece right here, which is owned by Young, which I believe that's 031. That must have a building on it.
That's probably the beauty parlor or whatever it is.
Yeah. It's the ones that are not in George's project are numbers 91, 95, and 97.
Yep.
And I just don't, if they're captured in the overlay, fine.
They are.
They'll be captured into the new waterfront district. And if they're not, we just need to specifically mention them. That's all.
And then I believe the American Legion is also in the overlay.
No, the Legion's in RB, I think. I don't. The Legion's a non-conforming use in there, and then that's the question: do we bring the Legion property into the harbor zone? That's an open question.
I'm just reading from the Harbor Business, the overlay district, map F5, lot 32, block 32. This one right here is in the harbor, is in the overlay, and that is the Legion.
Which one? All right, well,
The Legion, well,
The Legion is in, I mean, again, I went through this like in painful detail.
I'm assuming somebody did that to avoid the accusation of spot zoning, so they included these other properties in the overlay. And
Yeah.
that's fine if they did, because for all practical purposes, the Legion should be pulled out of the residential district and brought into the harbor use.
we could always make that amendment.
Yeah, all right, so if that's the case, I mean, Peter and I are, you know, I think we're on the same page. It's just the word of what we call it. And I wouldn't, you know, to the extent we get into takings, I wouldn't, you know, the things we've been talking about turning into open space as a practical matter are not going to get developed. So I wouldn't necessarily at this step turn anything into open space, just so we can avoid the taking issue and think about that longer, you know, think about that down the road.
Yeah, and also, Tom, I think if it were to come about, that Chapter 91 would say you really can't build a dock out into the middle of the harbor and interfere with the boat travel. The owners might, not today, but in time, might wish to, in fact, gift that to the town for tax purposes, you know, income tax, you know, and get it appraised for whatever.
I think the only proposed use in the last 25 years was a small boat marina. Wasn't that correct, Woody? They wanted to dredge and make it a little deeper, but
that wasn't good. It turned out that wasn't going to happen. I mean,
yeah, it had no place to come, which is a huge problem. But yeah, that's the only practical use of it, is something in the water.
So anyway, that
I would, you know, so
it's not necessarily a taking. It might be a mutually beneficial.
yeah, but I'm just suggesting we don't even have to get into that at this point, because as a practical matter, nothing can be built. So there's no need to just go ahead and rezone it open space at this step of the process. But I would make sure, you know, again, if you're correct about the HVBOD and its boundaries, then, you know, that's great. And we just put a single district and then start really, you know, past that with a height limit, and then start really giving a hard look at the uses that we allow in that waterfront district.
Okay. I personally think that it will be an easier sell to convert to use an existing terminology, which is waterfront business, and instead of creating a whole new harbor district. I just think from a selling perspective, it's easier to say we're consolidating it into an existing, which is waterfront business. And then we make changes to waterfront business to get us to where we want to be in terms of uses. And as you suggested, height and other table of area regulations.
And then the bylaw, I mean, the warrant article would simply have to refer to those properties that are being changed from something else into.
Yep.
We wouldn't have to list all the other.
Yep.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
And then the idea that I had written about expanding the HVBOD, I would table that right now.
Okay.
I wouldn't necessarily want to encourage that right away. Especially things I think as a practical matter, the height will preclude it unless we write a special permit provision. But again, that goes more to uses, which again, I think again is a step 2 process.
Yeah, I think that's a good compromise and is saleable.
Yeah.
So I think we've kind of gotten to agreement around height in terms of a maximum height, and we've got consensus around consolidating and the rezoning to waterfront business.
Yeah.
In terms of, you know, you mentioned selling that, you know, we could start this summer with informing the public that we intend to bring this forward in the fall, so that then we can anticipate the opposition from the existing property owners and get their comments and input before we go to the formal planning board Section 5 process.
Well, and that was again why I had, started to draft that presentation to the planning board, knowing that, planning board is kind of the first piece of buy-in that we need to get. And then from there, you can start talking to the public in terms of getting additional feedback and buy-in, and for those that are going to get rezoned to waterfront business. So I would like to try and take today's discussion and come up with a very focused conversation to have with the planning board around the 2 specific recommendations that we're making relative to the harbor, and do that in July, Tom.
Yeah, that's fine. We have to settle on the height thing though, but by knowing what's the maximum BFE in the harbor, so we can set the right numbers, so we can set the right number.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll get that. That's no.
Okay. I will, I'll put that on the next agenda to circle back on the BFE for the harbor, so we can set that max. And then, I will also work on kind of tuning up that presentation based on today's feedback. All right, so that's the harbor conversation. I know that took a bit longer, but I feel like we needed to kind of drive to consensus there in terms of getting a set of preliminary recommendations. Because as you're suggesting, Tom, if we want to go to special town meeting in the fall, now is the time to start moving quickly to bylaw language and getting buy-in.
Yeah.
All right, so next on the agenda is
Katie, I'm sorry, I
Yeah.
have to leave. I've got a family emergency I have to deal with.
okay. Yeah, no worries. Thank you, Peter. Appreciate you sticking in, and we hopefully got some consensus for you.
All right.
Okay.
And I'll catch up later.
Okay, that's
Thank
great.
you. Yeah.
Bye, Peter.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, so the next topic was housing options. And the goal was really just to update you on a meeting that Woody and I had with the Affordable Housing Steering Committee on May 25th. We had wanted to sort of test the waters with them relative to our ADU recommended bylaw changes. And we also wanted just to have a conversation with them more broadly about this whole goal area of diversity in housing options, or having a menu of housing options above and beyond just single family homes, and what we would need to do from a zoning perspective to make that a reality in town. In addition, we had the sort of added accelerant that the state had made those changes to the housing choice that in some cases lowered the voting threshold for specific housing option initiatives, such as multifamily, ADUs, and I can't remember whether mixed use was in that or not. It definitely was multifamily and ADUs. I'll just give my impressions and then you can weigh in. Woody, my impression was that the Affordable Housing Steering Committee, when we started to talk about the specifics of change to the ADU bylaw, it got into the weeds very quickly. And it was almost like we were missing the perspective of why are we doing this? We're trying to do this in order to create housing options. They quickly went to kind of, what does this mean in terms of water metering and sewer metering? And I guess when Woody and I reflected on that conversation, we realized that we need to set up a better dialogue first about the benefits of diversity in housing options and the benefits of why an changes to the ADU bylaw are being recommended, because otherwise the tendency is to dive into the weeds.
Yeah. It's a piece of the broader offerings, and ADUs alone aren't going to do much of anything, nor will low-income affordable housing, because we know there are mixed-use needs, there's multifamily needs, there's moderate income needs, downsizing, which seems to have kind of passed by the most developers. They can't wait to build something bigger and bigger and bigger. But at any rate, yeah, and I think underlying that, the affordable housing folks were concerned that if we added more housing units as a denominator, the numerator would have to go up. And our point is that so you get 2, 3, 4 applications a year. I mean, in 10 years, you might have to add 2 more affordable units to the whole entire town's quota, which is hundreds. So this isn't going to tip the apple cart over by any means, but it's one of many. And I think Katie and I talked about the next time around, I think we'll want to talk about 4 or 5 or 6 housing options, and we're going to serve up the first of these now, and then we'll tackle the second and third, but there's more to come. I think that'll be more acceptable to people.
I think
And I just would say after that, I did check with sewer and water, and they said, well, most people put it, if they have a tenant, even if it's an illegal tenant, they can certainly put in a meter. If that's a concern, and they don't want to build it into the rent, but that's not an expense item really. There's a little bit of a betterment cost, but trivial, $5.
Yeah. So I think the setup needs to be that menu first, and then selling the benefits second, and then third is the details. And then, after we had that conversation with the Affordable Housing Steering Committee, I actually attended an MAPC sponsored webinar that had sort of folks that do housing diversity nationwide. And, they just reemphasized how not difficult, but how challenging it is to sell in housing diversity to communities. And it doesn't, in some cases, matter what community is, it's just disruptive. And so there's a lot of marketing of the concepts that has to happen in order to get the buy-in. And part of the reason that the housing choice legislation changed the voting from supermajority 2/3 down to simple majority 50% is a recognition that almost every community in the state struggles to put in place this diversity of housing options, because there are always folks that are naysayers in terms of the change related to it. So that was the update there. The next update was relative to residential, and this was really a follow-up to the conversation that we had with the planning board. There were a couple areas that I had kind of flagged, and I know that Cassie, you've done a little bit of work around beginning to pull some benchmarking, and Woody, I know that you also are beginning to do some documentation around 16 towns, is it?
16.
Around proportional zoning, lot size, frontage, and some other metrics. So Cassie, I'll give you the floor just to kind of walk through what you've pulled together, and then Woody, you can certainly sort of weigh in with the additional work that you're doing. And this is really hopefully to get us to the specific recommendations.
Sure. Katie, you transitioned so quickly, but as it relates to the Affordable Steering Committee and kind of your conversations with I know that we had an informal conversation, but just wanted to bring it up again, because if you read through the bylaw, we've talked about it a little bit, but the minimum size unit for housing is set at 750 square feet. And I'm kind of like thinking forward towards a lowercase affordable housing option, and speaking towards the Cohasset housing plan for different housing formats and allowing people to live in Cohasset based on certain thresholds based on financial means. And so I'm wondering if that's a small amendment or something to think through about different housing sizes, and if 750 square feet is still appropriate for today's design standards based on construction costs, and also just technology and modular housing and some of the equipment that you see that's put into Boston as far as modular.
Well, Cassie, do you think the 750 is too high or too low?
I thought it was kind of high. I mean, I've built many.
Okay, no, I don't have any experience, so.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying we have to put in 300 square foot studios, but you know, a 600 square foot, one bed apartment is pretty standard for Boston. It's all about space programming, right? And there's different ways of being creative through it. And I think that it would allow a lot more housing variations and different demographics to be able to live in Cohasset. So I thought it was just something that we can kind of talk about lightly and see if it's worth considering or thinking further about, and doing case studies and some research on house sizings to date as it compares to when the original bylaw was written, that kind of set forth that number of 750.
Yeah, I think where Woody and I were headed with this was releasing the restrictions and not having a restriction, and allowing the designation to be made by the homeowner as to the split of what would be accessory dwelling and what would be the primary residential. Again,
Or even in a multifamily. I think Cassie's getting at multifamily, aren't you?
Primarily, but I think that
Okay.
accessory dwelling units are just a conversation with the Affordable Steering Committee. I think a good conversation is, if it's not a capital A based on area median income, how can we be creative of allowing people
Right.
that don't meet those thresholds for financial reasons to be able to be an affordable? What's our other option? How do we think through that?
okay. All right, so your comment was more targeted to multifamily, but do we have a restriction currently? I thought the 750 was tied to ADUs, not to multifamily.
Oh, well,
In the Village Business District, I think the bylaw says nothing smaller than 750 and nothing greater than 1,500.
Okay,
That was Village Business District.
okay.
yeah, I think you may be right, Cassie, and that's where those condos, over in James Lane kind of went off the rails a little bit.
Those are huge. I think about, the end user is essentially paying for square footage. So the more square footage you have, the more you're going to pay for it. So the smaller square footage, the more creative you can be on.
I wonder what the thinking was behind having a minimum of, let's say, 750 as opposed to 600.
Yeah. I
What
don't know.
what kind of people would you keep out or invite
Well,
in?
it was just based on standard living of how people were living back then, with just bigger spaces. I don't know.
It was designed not to have just studios for the most part. Thinking that would be more transient clientele.
Oh,
But if you think about like workforce housing in the city, a 640 square foot, one bedroom.
I know, but this was only written 15 years ago. It's not that ancient history.
I feel like over 15 years, a lot has changed when it comes to
the motivation.
well, it's certainly something that I personally would favor being more flexible, particularly if it's limiting the diversity initiatives. I mean, I'm not qualified to.
Yeah, if I'm just going through
opinion,
a pricing matrix based on square footage, it's a lot more expensive to live in a 750 square foot apartment or condo versus a 640 square foot. So,
Well, I would suggest maybe that it be tied to some bonus, some kind of incentive for the town. Or it's everything in the village, for example, is a special permit. So you're still subject to the argument, is it substantially more detrimental? But usually when we give variations from a set limit, sometimes there's a bonus attached to it, and more affordability, so rather than 10%, you got to give us 15% or 20% or something,
Yeah, be part of like the waiver discussion, which is fine.
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
I mean, that's why I don't care if it's lower, if it was tied to something, but if I remember, the principal reason was to have, it was considered, the village was considered to be, downsizing options for people in town, and to have a reasonable space for people to live in and not encourage cheaper transient kind of housing that studios might represent.
Sort of like the housing that's over dependable cleaners.
How big is that?
I don't know, but it's pretty gruesome.
The next project.
But I also think that there has been a seed change or a shift in terms of smaller housing formats that Cassie is sort of touching on in terms of.
Well, Brook Street is probably an example. I don't know how big their units are. One just sold, but,
Mhm.
Yeah.
but that was a sale. That's not a rental or anything.
No.
I don't know. Well,
Okay.
anyway,
Well-
so Cassie, where does this chart take you?
So what I focused on, and this is just a follow-up conversation. I know that we didn't get to touch base, Woody and Tom, before I sent this over this morning, and I apologize. But what I was trying to essentially do is look at three things: setbacks, lot shapes, and then the discussion of FAR versus lot coverage and how changing or modifying our lot coverage, how that impacts the way that people are going to build in the future. So just this first slide, what I tried to do is I just tried to, it's a lot to read and kind of comprehend it. So I just created these diagrams, and I think that we could probably use this and kind of, Katie, I think for future presentations, we can sharpen our pencils and make these a little better. But
Yeah.
I think we kind of start with the basics of like just a square box of a lot. And this is exactly what Situate does. Situate just has these great visuals of massings on lots. And I thought it was just really helpful. So I was trying to kind of replicate that. But I think if you're looking at RA versus RB, or that should be RC, not R3, but
Yeah.
lot coverage stays the same, right? It's 20% throughout each district. And the future slides will kind of show you that the lot coverage, and I think that Tom has always been telling us that FAR is a better metric compared to lot coverage, because in no way do we get close to 20% on the majority of current home builds. But even as you kind of slide that scale back towards a 5% or 7%, you still see these a large mansion and large homes. So that was just something to note. But what I tried to do is I just tried to create these visual diagrams that we can kind of work with and play with. As I was kind of researching our neighbors on setbacks, it actually seems like we're pretty strict when it comes to front yards. So for RA, the setback is 20 feet, RB is 30 feet, and RC is 30 feet. And that's actually pretty strict compared to what you see. If you go to the next page, Katie,
Yeah.
what I did try to outline, and what I should probably actually put down is actually prove that we are strict in certain ways to consider. But I tried to find how can we be better compared to our neighbors and use those as precedents. So Situate, like their rear yard is 30 feet. So I thought to myself, okay, well, is that something that we can consider and use a benchmark like Situate? Whereas I think if you go back to the former slide, Katie,
Sorry.
our rear yard is 15, 30, and 30 respectively across the districts. So that's something that we could consider. So RA has the chance that we can improve upon that and change the rear yard to 30 feet. And then what was the next note, Katie, on the next slide of what I put in there? Oh, and then just the town of Norwell. So I thought that was really interesting. It says in residential districts A and B, no building or structure, swimming pool, tennis court should be erected or placed within 20 feet of a side or rear yard. So again, RA has the potential to be a little bit more strict, and we can change the side yard to 20 feet if we want. I think Katie, kind of in conversations with the planning board, they just want some feedback and kind of next steps. So I think that if we kind of look at this as a group, should we just kind of say we want to sharpen the pencils on rear yards and side yards, and specifically within RA, we want to make it a little bit more strict and conform to 30 foot rear yards and 20-foot side yards. The kind of further slides of where I looked at key studies across the different districts, RA seems to, it has smaller homes. So that's where I thought that people aren't really leveraging kind of rear yard and side yards to build larger homes. It's more seen in RB and RC districts. But that was something that kind of glared out to me of saying, like, this is something that we can impact immediately, is changing rear yards and side yards for residential A district.
Okay. I thought part of the conversation that we were having was like, we were going to make it proportional. We were moving away from a one size fits all. So I appreciate what you're saying in terms of making RA more strict, but I thought part of the conversation was, do we want to make it setbacks proportional instead of one size fits all?
I was considering more the FAR scale of being part of the proportional zoning. I thought setbacks was just kind of saying, do we want to just sharpen our pencil and say that we can do X, Y, and Z because our neighbors are doing it, and we're more lenient as a town? But maybe I just misunderstood the assignment.
I And Katie, I still don't have it. I don't think within a district RA, we can have a sliding scale of dimensions. Still, we have to
I'm
treat.
not suggesting a sliding scale of dimensions within.
Oh, no,
RA.
no. If you're not doing within a district, yes, then I agree. I think we should have. I'm envisioning a lower lot coverage than 20%.
Right.
Based on the data that we have within our own town, that very few are actually at that limit. No reason we should encourage it. I would differ frontage and setbacks in each of the three districts, stepping up in each one.
Mhm.
And an FAR that's probably in the neighborhood of 1.5 and might differ from districts. It might be a little larger for RC.
No,
And again,
I
we have the data that supports what it is today.
Yeah, I think it's hard to.
And I think we need to.
And I think that we should look at that because that might not be strict enough, Tom, based on kind of.
No, in answering to the concerns of people that think we're getting overdeveloped and things are too big, you know, we translate to what we have today into an FAR and then probably ratchet it down a bit.
Yeah, and I'll show you a 0.15. You can still in the RB district, you can build massive homes. So
yeah, I thought the data had supported that some districts were under 1 for an FAR right now. So, you know, I know it certainly won't be much larger than 1.5 anywhere. I think that's probably the sweet
Well,
spot.
Cassie's got a couple of slides, right? Examples.
yeah. Well, do you want me to go back to? Do you want to go through lot?
Oh yeah, the greatest hits. Yes, we want to see this one.
Okay.
I like this one.
So on setbacks, I guess I would send setbacks back to the three of you. And I know you have.
I would hold on that one for the moment.
Yeah. But I would send it back to the three of you on residential to really come up with a recommendation around the setbacks. And it sounds like you've got some data here, Cassie, and Woody, you've been pulling quite
Well,
a bit.
yeah, and the other situation has very much to do with the size of the lot, but most of RA is built out, as we know.
Mm.
There isn't much vacant land left.
No, but there's still a huge potential. So, Katie, if you go to the RA,
Well,
we can jump for it. But if you go to the RA, so if you see the size of the lots, the majority of them are non-conforming. And some of these homes, like 18 Elm Court.
yeah, okay.
It's interesting to me that these, you know, I would assume they still have the potential to be large homes if they're non-conforming single lot exemptions. So I put this together to show you that, you know, for instance, Tom, for a 0.15 in RA, 45 Church Street, it was just renovated in 1980, so it's still a little outdated. So it does have potential if it were to be flipped. And that's where the single lot exemption kind of conversation comes into play. If someone's going to do a 20% lot coverage ratio, right now it's only at a 15% lot coverage ratio. So my point here, and Tom, we can still discuss the conversation on coverage, but lots in the RA are kind of leaning, even at a 5%, you can have a 1,000 square foot home. So 8 Cushing Road has, you know, 1/4 of an acre. So it's not that large of a piece of property. But so what I was trying to find here was that I didn't think that lot coverage was the right way to do it. I looked at it and it just made me feel like lot coverage, you can still have fairly large size homes or doable homes. You know, at a 17% at 36 Aaron River, you have a 4,700 square foot home. So
Yeah,
I don't know.
I think the only reason, I agree, if you go to FAR, you don't really need to concern yourself with lot coverage that much.
Yeah.
Except to the extent, you know, now we are trying to preserve open space by having a clearing limit. We already have limits on how much impervious material can be put on a lot. I think the lot coverage still discourages sprawl across the lot. you know, I doubt housing styles around here would get to the point where people would build sprawling ranches instead of 2.5-story houses. But if you don't constrain it by lot coverage, you could have that theoretically.
Well, and keep in mind, lot coverage is impervious coverage, which could be a swimming pool, could be a tennis court, depending,
Yeah, I still
an
think
outbuilding, a detached garage, lots of
still
things.
think we're going to need to deal with, you know, the clearing limit, incorporate that into what we're doing, and these outbuildings and driveways and other impervious surfaces that people can add on.
But to Cassie's point, one of the things that really strikes me, has always struck me, is the fact that we have a one size fits all in so many of our area dimensions. And I mean, from height to lot coverage to setbacks, frontage. I mean, you know, it's bizarre. And that's where I sort of have a problem. In looking at these 16 towns, not everybody uses an FAR, but I would say, just eyeballing it, I haven't done the tally, I'll bet you 2/3 of the towns have an FAR measure, and they range from Bedford through, you know, Westwood and all the way up and down and Carlisle and Concord. So that's one thing. And we're the only town, I think, that has the same frontage for all its residential districts.
Yeah.
And it's the smallest frontage of any of these 16 towns, 50 feet. That's unheard of.
Right. And we had the opposite at some point. It's just, that gets back to our debate, is that going to encourage more subdivisions rather than A&Rs? So, and which is the lesser of two evils? But I would, just off the top of my head, say we should have, you know, 75, 100, 125, or 75, 125, and 150, or 200 even for residence C. I would go to typical suburban frontages, you know, that we see around us that we don't have.
Yeah, now most towns do have coverage as a percentage, but the words in the bylaws seem to focus more on FARs and how you calculate it. And there the towns are kind of, half of them are net and half of them are gross. I think there was a sense amongst us that gross floor area is what people see, the passersby, and maybe we should do that as opposed to allow people to game on the net side of things. You know, I didn't finish off the upstairs or something like that.
Yeah. Well, I want to add one thought while you were talking, Tom, about coverage. Like we have coverage and we have building coverage. I feel like if we kept the coverage and eliminated the building coverage and substituted FAR, we would, if you kept the coverage, you address the sprawl issue. If you eliminate the building coverage and substitute it and add in FAR as your metric, you get a much more precise regulation.
Well, if we take the clearing limit that we just put in and say we don't graduate it, we make it applicable to all lots, blah, 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 blah. It's 30, what is it, 30% has to be kept? So 70% of the lot is available for some form of human development. You know, we have the building coverage in that because we want the buildings to be only a certain part of that, and the rest of it can be yard and pools and driveways, garages.
But aren't you speaking?
I don't care. I guess I don't care, as long as we have then the clearing limit still in place that prevents totally stripping the lot. I suppose within that 70%, how much of it is building and how much of it is yard and driveway, I ultimately don't care. But that's
but Katie's making a good point, is that we have two coverage measurements that apply to every resident, and we probably only need one coverage thing, because neither of them deal with volume or massing.
Which one do you rather have? The one that
maybe total coverage. I'm not wed to the percentage, but total coverage, and as Katie suggests, drop the building coverage and put in FAR, because that deals with massing. And that's what the citizens are upset about.
Yeah.
you know, they could give a damn about whether or not the, you know, basement is heated or not, or the enclosed porch has heat.
Right. All right. Well, I mean, then that would look like you'd have the clearing limit and basically then saying 70% of the lot is open to however you can do it within this FAR. Here's your FAR.
And your setbacks.
Here's your
And your
FAR.
setbacks.
Here's
Yeah.
right. Here's your setbacks. Here's your FAR. And within that 70% that you are allowed to clear, knock yourself out. You can do whatever you want.
And most people are not going to cover, I mean, you know, if they've got even a 5,000 square foot house, why don't you make the assumption that the footprint is at most 2,000?
Yeah.
I mean, they're not going to blanket the rest of the lot with brick patios and barbecues. And I mean, you know, it's just not going to happen.
No, but
I don't know. Okay, I mean, not Katie. I mean, Cassie, you have another slide, right? Another
Yeah.
picture?
No, I have a few slides.
Yep, I'll move ahead. I was just, so I would like to see us as a group, if as a homework assignment, drive past some of these addresses so that we can kind of get a read from the street. I think part of the exercise would be helpful to drive past them and look at 8 Cushing versus 36 Erin River in terms of a 0.1 versus a 0.3 FAR. So that's just my suggestion. So this is RB.
So yeah, this is RB. So if you look at just a 0.3 FAR compared to a 0.15 that Tom was kind of loosely suggesting, for Stoneleigh Lane, I had to recall where this was. This is off Linden Drive. But you essentially get a 2,900 square foot home on less than 1/4 of an acre versus a 0.15. So this just starts to get a little wonky because the acreage is so much higher. So 132 Lambert's Lane, that's the Bosworth home. That's 1.5 acres. So at a 0.15, you get 11,600 square foot home for GBA. Your building footprint is 3,000 square feet, and it's only a 5% coverage. So kind of case in point that a 0.15, it needs to be a sliding scale based on your acreage. And lot coverage really doesn't seem to do it, because even if we cap it at 5%, it's just
Yeah, lot coverage is relevant on small lots.
yeah, right.
And as we know, small lots exist in all 3 districts because particularly RC makes no sense. Half of it was developed 50 years ago and half of it was developed 250 years ago.
Yeah, and I guess kind of the question is, so on Lambert's Lane, you drive down there and you see beautiful homes on your way to the golf course. Are we trying to say that like the Bosworth home is offensive and too big? I don't know the answer to that. I think someone would look at that and say it's a beautiful home on your way to the golf course.
It's on a big lot.
And it's on a big lot.
You know, I ran into something in one town. I can't remember. I told Katie this morning, but it is the exception to the rule. As I say, most of these towns are using a FAR ratio, but this one town has 3 residential districts, as we do. And then within each district, they have divided about it into 7 or 8 lot sizes, let's say 10 to 15,000 square feet, 15 to 20,000 square feet, so on and so forth. And they have different, everything from FARs, in a couple of cases, different heights. And I thought, well, all right, so that's proportional zoning, but it is in the same district, treating everybody alike. But then I went to the next district, and lo and behold, the 10 to 15,000 square foot lot in District 2 had the same requirements as the 10 to 15,000 square foot lot in District 1. And when you take a look at it overall, it's the closest thing I've seen to proportional zoning.
Was that Newton? That was similar to the town of Newton, right?
That could have been. I just don't remember, but it was a clever way to deal with it. But, you know, I don't know.
I think that any way that you slice it, there's going to be some arbitrary way of doing it, right? We're just going to have to pick one. With 4 Stoneleigh, it's meeting the max coverage, but its gross building areas, it's a 3,000 square foot home. Is that huge on a?
Well, it's a quarter, as you say. It's not even a quarter. It's a 1/5 of an acre.
Yeah.
Lot, sure, it's a teeny little lot.
I imagine if we drove by this, I don't think it would glare at me as being offensive. It's maxed its coverage.
Yep.
So it's hard. There's so many variables to look at. I think we've kind of narrowed it down. I don't think walk coverage is enough. I think a sliding scale at FAR is in the step in the right direction. It's just kind of then, to Katie's point, looking at stuff during drive-bys, but then assessing what's offensive versus not offensive. Do the Bosworths deserve to live in a 12,000 square foot home? I can't really answer that question.
And in order to violate things like coverage, it would have to be a 48,000 square foot home.
I don't,
I
again,
mean, you know, laughable.
Yeah.
I think that 0.15 to 0.25 is kind of a for me, a very comfortable zone. And again, what size house that allows you to build is dependent in my mind based on the lot that you have.
But so Katie, on Forest only, a 3,000, like, would you say that's too big?
Well, I think in our case, we are going to have to look at 0.3s because we have so many small, we're such a town of non-conforming, but you know, if I was going to address like new construction, that range of 0.15 to 0.25 is sort of where I would want to live. The 0.3, I think, honestly, is just a fact of our non-conforming lot size
Yeah, I mean, the house was built 100 years ago, and it was renovated 80 years ago, or
Yeah.
whenever, or not 80, I mean 60 years ago.
So,
And you did a good job.
Yeah.
yeah, I don't find it offensive. I just don't, in terms of like, if you're asking me like what I would want to see in terms of like a straight up new construction, it would be more in that zone of 0.15 to 0.25 than a 0.3. But
and appropriately scaled based on lot size. Because
Exactly.
RC, I think I included Jeff Schwartz's house,
Yep.
which I think is one of the most beautiful homes in Cohasset. It's apparently an 18,000 square foot home on 2 acres.
That could be when you move up a notch in your.
Yeah, one tree, Bart Lane. But it's a 5% coverage on 2 acres. It's considered, it actually in the tax assessor's database, that's straight from the property card, custom mansion. It feels like a mansion, but I think it's absolutely gorgeous. So, I guess I'm struggling with how to cut it when it comes
I think that's where the sliding scale allows you the solution. You're not choosing a 0.2 for RB and a 0.15 for RC. It has to be relative to lot size.
Yeah, can I excuse everybody? I do have to leave, but I wanted you to know that I've been listening to this and I've been going in and out of Zoom because I've been traveling. So, but I'm very impressed with what everybody has had to say, but I do have to leave. So see you all later and keep up the good work.
Thanks, Jack.
Okay, thanks, Jack. Go over but take a look on the left, 10 Mohawk Way. Okay, it's got a 10% coverage. It's on a half-acre lot. It's also a one-story building.
I love that house. That's my favorite house on Mohawk.
You could double the building and not affect coverage whatsoever.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I don't like the other homes on Mohawk Lane. I think they all feel like McMansions. This to me feels like something out of Cal. So I loved that house. So that's a 0.1 on half an acre. That doesn't feel too large with me. It's got a lot of character. But again, it's my opinion. So I don't know if that's the right way to look at it either.
Well, I think that's why, I get concerned with using a limit on GBA as kind of our metric because it feels more like a statement around proper home size. Whereas when we're talking about FAR and it being massing relative to lot size, it feels like yes, there is a line in the sand, but it feels a bit less like we're choosing a lifestyle for people. Yeah. And again, I I see this as some kind of sliding scale within each district. We know it's possible. Newton got approval. It's
Yeah, we just have to figure out how to.
We have to figure out the sliding scale.
Yeah. And so Katie, the two case studies,
Yeah.
RB, like Tad Lane, I know that there are people around town that are not happy.
So is that
That's the next one.
this is Tad Lane? Yeah.
Yeah, so this is one of the lots off Howe Road where I believe they took out a lot of ledge and built this very large home. And the picture in the tax assessor database, I think, is wrong. It showed the former house, but it looked like something right next to Bow Street on Jerusalem, so I took it out. But this was built in 2017 on purpose as just a flip, right? So a little bit more than half an acre. So in the RB district, it's considered non-conforming, and it's well, if you don't want to look at GBA, but just building footprint, it has building footprint of 2,600, but the lot coverage is only 10%. So that to me makes it sound like the lot coverage for this property is probably bogus, right? It's half the size of what the lot coverage, allows for. But the FAR is a 0.31. And I think a lot of people are unhappy with this piece of property. And if you look at the Zillow actually says that it's only 5,800. And I know kind of the loophole here is, I think the builders they didn't build out the attic and they didn't build out the basement until after. So if you look on Zillow, they actually are just putting in there what the original building plan said of 5,800. And then they probably built out the basement attic afterwards.
Yep. But again, this is an example where, again, the 0.31 jumps off as people are reacting to that.
Yeah.
As a new home construction.
Mm-hmm. And so with all of these, do you think, so this would fall under the single lot exemption is the way they would have gotten around to being able to do this?
Well, a single lot exemption is that you have to have had it registered, right, or recorded, one or the other, way back when, and not built on. Is this a custom built? Was this a vacant lot?
So I thought it was. I grew up right down the street. I don't remember there ever being a house here, but if you look in the tax assessor's database, there was a house. It looks like there was a house there, but it honestly looked like the house at Holly Hill Farm, right after.
I don't think the single lot exemption applies to a lot once developed, even if it's abandoned.
Yeah.
It has to be never built on.
Yeah, single lot exemption only applies to undeveloped land.
So the tax assessors, the property card must have been wrong. It must have been, because how else would you have been able to?
Well,
how else could you have built a brand new house on an undersized lot?
Yeah.
It's a very good question.
Well, the lot is, the lot size is grandfathered because there's a non-conforming structure on it. You can then take that non-conforming lot size and build out to the maximum under table of area regulations. And so in this case,
If there was a house on it.
There was a house on it. It's a non-conforming lot, so it falls under all the non-conforming protections, correct?
Yeah, if they took the non-conforming house down.
Yep.
You can restore a non-conforming house, or you can restore a house on a non-conforming lot.
Okay.
If that's what they did here.
Yeah, so
By restore, I mean you can replace it.
So then if you go one up, I've had two brokers reach out to me about this property at the corner of Green Street. I don't know if you know Mr. O'Malley. I think he was in the St. Anthony's, but so it's just a one-story cape, and I've had two brokers reach out to me, I think just because they live closely down the street, saying, do I know the family there? I have people who want to buy the site. So, this is again a non-conforming lot in the RB district. So I actually put in here something that's wrong. I put in the single lot exemption, but I guess if there's already a non-conforming structure there, 20%, you can basically have an 11,000 square foot home there at a point, and that gets you a 0.6 FAR. So that would be absolutely massive. So that's where the kind of the FAR scale versus the lot coverage scale doesn't really jive.
You sure your math is right?
What?
Well, I mean, if it's an 11,700 square foot lot, and you could put an 11,700 house with that much fire on it, wouldn't you get a 1.1, a 1.0?
So 0.2 times 11,719.
I don't know. I mean, I don't. Maybe. I mean, you could.
Well, so you get, oh, I'm sorry, that's the lot size. So you get a 2,300 square foot times 3 stories, a 7,000 square foot home, which equates to a 0.6 FAR. That makes sense,
Okay.
right? The existing lot is 11,700.
Yeah. Okay. So you have a 20% coverage or whatever.
Yeah.
Right.
And that
But
equates to
this
a
is an existing non-conforming home, so you have the ability to, what do you mean? This falls directly within the ZBA. If the structure is torn down and rebuilt as a new home.
Yeah. Well, if it complies in all respects to setbacks, et cetera, you can do a lot. I wonder on a lot, I don't know, maybe this complies in all respects. And so the only thing that's non-conforming is the lot. And if so, then there's section, I think 8.8 that allows you to build more as long as you're not, creating any non-conformity. If the only non-conformity is the lot, you can do a lot, no pun intended, you can do a lot here.
Yeah, and I didn't try to fit in the 7,000, or I didn't try to fit in the 2,300 within the setbacks requirements. I just did the 20%.
Right.
3 stories.
Yep.
I'm kind of, I don't know, given the age of the building and everything, I would put some money in the fact that it's got at least one non-conformity in terms of a setback or something. And it would have to come to us, at which point we would then have, really take a look at the proportionality and the neighborhood it's in. But it's possible this thing skates skates through the requirements. I don't know. I'm just looking.
Yeah. So I thought this was just a good example of a small cape at the corner of Green Street and Sawyer, a very small, intimate.
I know the house. I mean, it's tucked down there. Half of it's almost underground.
Yeah, it's right. The elevation slopes down. So I thought in the last example, I put in Tom's favorite house on Nichols Road.
Tom.
Oh, there we go.
This one.
Now, who owned this? Was this Peter Gerdeke's house? No.
I think it's Watson.
Okay.
Or a
So is this the one, what's his name, clear cut the lot?
Yeah.
This is what.
Okay. Yeah, I know. Okay.
This is what got built?
Yes.
It's a modest house.
Friggin' monstrosity.
So the lot coverage is only 9% though, Tom.
It's a monstrosity.
I agree with you.
What a nice job he did. Jeez, he kept it under all the maximums.
And I told you the feedback from the neighbors was that they were happy with it because they can see the water now because of all the lot clearings. Even though it's a monstrosity, they were happy about the lot clearings. They now have water views from their home.
This is something to build so you can separate yourself from your children by putting them completely like on the other side of town in this house. Look at this. That's Katie's point. It's an affront to parenting.
Close to a point.
Yeah, I mean, this is where, again, if you've got lot coverage at 9%, it just underscores that lot coverage does nothing to control. And this is where, again, where I think
that FAR is way too high.
Yeah. So I put these case studies in here to trigger Tom partially, but I do think that they were also good.
You're just winding him up and you're enjoying every second of it. You, Cassie.
It doesn't take much to wind me up. So.
but I really do want to encourage folks to drive past these, because I think it's like when you start to cross over the 0.2, like what point do you begin to react emotionally? I definitely react when we get up towards 0.3, especially with the case studies you just showed.
Yeah.
I can see a problem though in educating the public, because if I look at something that's 0.25,
Mhm.
that sounds like a really small number to me. 0.3. Boy, that's small. I mean, I know it isn't, but you know what I mean? I mean, conceptually.
No, well, we're gonna have to be ready with examples of
Yes,
what
yeah.
it actually means.
And I do think that Nichols Road is unfortunately, it's 120 Nichols Road is in my opinion, a beautiful mansion. And so who am I to say that someone can't build that beautiful mansion there? It's massive. And even like 379 Atlantic, that's not the biggest home when you're driving. That's right before the straightaway past Sandy Beach, that 0.3 example. That's not the biggest home on Atlantic to me. So that one actually is not offensive to me either at a 0.3, but
Offensive is probably not the right word, but
appropriate. I don't know what the right way.
we're supposed to, I mean, we're you know, we talk about affordable housing. This is where the rubber is going to meet the road. Everybody in town says, oh, I want housing diversity and I want this and I want mixed incomes. And this is when we put these things before them, then we're going to see if they really believe in that. But this used to be a middle class, working class, well, it used to be a working class fishing and farming community. Then the middle class came in, and now it's becoming something different. And is that correct? Do we want to be in a town that, you know, if I had to move back here today, I couldn't. You know, I'll be very honest with you. I don't know if any of us could. I don't know where the money
do well when you sell your hometown.
I don't know where the money is coming from that's buying these.
Yeah, buy that,
But that's another story. But that's
buy that
question
Airstream and you're all set.
Yeah, well,
But I think that the lot clearing is a good point to make towards the town. It's not that people shouldn't be able to build mansions, right? I think
yeah,
getting the narrative across about
Yes.
lot clearing, preserving outside space, preserving natural landscaping, and how does that come to be with an FAR proportional zoning is the way that I would propose it. I don't know. Like
I mean,
when I
to-
drive up Nichols Road, I'm like, it's massive. It's not Pleasant Street doesn't look the way that it looked like when I was growing up. I think those are oversized homes on a small hill, but I don't know. Who am I to say that someone can't build that? I don't know the answer yet, guys.
well, there is the law provides you with answers to say that you can say yes, you can't do that. So the idea that people can do anything they want with their piece of property is a completely incorrect interpretation of Constitution.
You know what we don't have here that I'd like to see, not Cassie, the work assignment, but I'm listening to everybody. There's no such thing as a good single measure. They're all imperfect, but if you get 2, 3, 4 working together, I wonder how many of these have under 100 or 125 foot frontages. And 125 seems to be the norm of the 16, maybe it's 100, but of the 16 towns I looked at, much bigger.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Woody. So the lot shape slide that I have, I use Duxbury as an example, which is 160. And then they actually did that in imaginary circle. So it's almost like a backwards pork chop, but they require you to have a 150-foot imaginary circle around the lot. So it's like the backwards pork chop lot. I thought that was an interesting measure that, who is it that sent you an email? Oh, Stuart Ivermain said that we should look at that. And I thought that was a good example.
Yeah, I mean, these things all, as long as it doesn't get too complicated. I was telling Katie, I ran into something this morning that in order to figure out, it was kind of a far estimate, but it took measurement A times a measurement B, and the product of that you had to multiply against measurement C plus D, and then divided by the square of E underneath. Well, I mean, yeah, fine, you can do that, but there's not a creature who can understand what the hell that means until you've done the math. I mean, it isn't that tricky, but more than one kind of measure makes sense. The only other takeaway is that coverage is almost next to useless unless you're in a postage stamp size lot.
Right. Do you like the imaginary circle?
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, there's the imaginary circle and the imaginary square. I think Hingham or somebody, don't they have a square that they use. It's the same concept.
Yeah. But it actually is smaller than the lot coverage width. I mean, than the frontage width in Duxbury.
Oh, yeah? 150 feet in diameter, okay. Yeah, I
Thought that was interesting. And then number 2, I was trying to interpret that into my visual graphic, but the lot shall contain at least 4,500 square feet between the required setback line and the right-of-way line from which the lot takes its frontage. So does that mean between the frontage and the road, there has to be another open space of 45, or there has to be 4,500 square feet of space?
well, the right of, yeah, I mean, the front, the required setback line, you could comply with the required setback line, but not have 4,500 square feet from the right-of-way line. That's a strange, I mean, I could see that happening a lot, but I don't know what, it only says the setback line doesn't much matter.
Yeah.
Maybe the setback has to be 50 or 60 feet. I mean, to be silly about it, I don't know.
Yeah, that was an interesting one to me.
Okay.
Duxbury, by the way, is not a place of perfect clarity. They have some very confusing bylaws sometimes, in my experience with them.
Okay.
Okay, I can buy that.
Okay. I do have to hop,
Yeah. geez.
Yeah, so do I.
no, but I guess what I would love to see is, Woody, you have some work in progress.
Yeah,
Cassie, you have this, which I plan on digesting and doing some drive-bys of the case studies. I think that when you guys can meet as a threesome and go through Woody's work and your work, and hopefully what I'd love to see is some recommendations coming out in terms of setbacks, frontage, lot shape requirements, and ultimately perhaps a point of view around far sliding scales. I know that's a lot, but that's we have to eventually get to firm numbers. And so somebody has to take a stab at it.
yeah, and I think until we do that, right now, I'm thinking, oh my God, this is going to be complicated and we're going to lose the audience in 2 minutes. But there may be, clarity may emerge here. There may be a simple way to pitch this and
I have thought about this presentation of changing the whole bylaw in my head a zillion times, and I don't think people are going to get locked down on the numbers too much. The most important thing is why we are changing it.
yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think we need to also craft that narrative.
It's not what we're changing so much as why after 30 years we feel it's done, needs to be done. I think we need to back that up with all the anecdotal data, and information we have about people saying, I want views of the harbor preserved. I think houses are too big. I think there's too much development, blah, 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 blah. That's going to be the most important thing, is the why. I don't think the numbers, they'll see somebody say, well, this is going to affect my lot and blah, blah, blah. Okay, that always happens. You deal with it. But we have to have a lot of public forums before town meeting.
And we've got to do what Cassie's done, kind of cubed, because everybody's got a house in their neighborhood or next door to them or their own house, and they're going to want to, pick this apart. But
yeah, I don't know. I don't
or
know.
Would I be okay
Well, it's
under
certainly
the circumstances?
a town meeting. I don't think we can bury people in charts unless, if we're redoing the entire bylaw, I would like to think we'll set up a single town meeting session for that and then everything else on another night, because it'll need that kind of attention. But I'd love to know what they did in 1955 when they were first proposing a bylaw. So, they must have dealt with it in a certain way. But in, all this kind of backup data and numerous charts and slides and graphs, for the public presentations, we're going to need them. And we're going to have a logical way to break up the bylaw and present it in certain days. We're going to have to plan this like months in advance of town meeting.
Yes.
But it's
as we're simultaneously doing the Section 5 process with the planning board, we need to be also presenting it to the public in a forum other than that formal setting. you know, a workshop or something on a Saturday at the library, you know, anything in the auditorium.
So you're making my argument for why I want a consultant on board to do that.
Well, this is where I always disagree that we don't, you know, we have 4 smart people right here, however many are still on the line. I think we can do this, and I think people are going to listen. I mean, Katie, it was obvious to me at town meeting that people put a lot of faith in you and trust what you say and believe what you say. They do for Woody, I know. And that's who people are going to want to hear from, not some consultant who will say whatever.
Well, I wouldn't worry about some of that. I mean, I frankly, Tom, think we do need help, whether it's, not necessarily led by a consultant, but what we need is the same role that you would play as a lawyer quite often. You have a client who's got something they want to get done or whatever, and you facilitate, but you don't do it on your own. You do it, you know, as their, forgive the word, servant or facilitator, you know?
Well,
I get it. But again, going back to the original point is why we're doing it. That really needs to generate from us, whoever presents it.
No, I agree. There's
As opposed to the numbers and the limits we actually put in.
I do want to get to, I absolutely agree with your why, and that is going to be how this whole thing gets sold. I am anxious just to get to some numbers that we can kind of like check that off the list. So
yeah,
and I've started that, but whatever, you know, anybody can put their chart together.
But again, that's why I was hoping the 3 of you could get to a first pass of some numbers. If the 3 of you can agree, then I'm going to be good in general.
Yep. I know that this was rough. It just, but this was really helpful.
no, it's terrific.
Great.
Don't make any apologies.
No.
The data is
Lord.
the data is amazing because, you know, everything in the past I've tried to do on this subject has been really flying by the seat of the pants, and in comparison with just gut feelings that this is wrong, this needs to be changed. But now we have this data to back it up, and I think it's fantastic.
Well, I think between the case studies that you've got here and the 16-town survey that Woody has put together, I think that we're going to
You've already got me completing the task before it started. Give me a
told
break.
me about it this morning at 11 o'clock.
God,
I think
you're
it'd be done by 4:30. Come on.
Jeez, I know.
But I think the combination of the two is going to allow us to hopefully, you know, jump to some conclusions, or at least some numbers, and then we can get around to the very important why of how we're going to package and explain all this to the community.
May I ask too that, again, for the practical and shooting toward the fall, proposed a total of 5 zoning articles for the fall. I just rewrote the harbor one based on our discussions today, but the other 4, I don't know if anybody else has seen, or well, you did distribute it, but
I did.
Again, you know, the fall comes on as pretty quick, so I'd like us to set aside some time to discuss whether we go forward with those 5 or any number of them.
Tom, I will put that as agenda item number 1 at our next meeting.
And just,
I did look at them, and to be honest, I'll send you some feedback, but honestly, 1 through 3, I was completely on board with. The ledge one, I had some questions on in terms of, but then the harbor rezoning, I think we came to a consensus.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
So,
yeah, and just so for Woody and Cassie's benefit, 1 was redoing the height that we've discussed. 1 has been the modification to the single lot exemption that we've been discussing. 3 is the frontage chain, which we have already discussed.
That's interesting. You know,
and 4 is the ledge protection one that we now have kind of put ourselves on the limb. We have promised the community that is step 2 that is coming. The question is still, what is the actual regulation we want to?
Yeah, no, but it's a great start. It's a basis, and whatever tweaking. 2 things. 1, the single lot exemption. Not one of those 16 towns has a single lot exemption. I'll bet you that if out of the 330 towns that have bylaws, I'll bet you there probably aren't more than 5 in the entire state. I'd be
Well,
Prove me wrong, but I
No,
mean,
no,
not
correct.
one of
I
these
think-
towns has that.
I think you're right, but correct me if I'm wrong when you say eliminate it. 40A, Section 6 is under state law called a single lot exemption, and we have to have that.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm talking about B.
Oh, yeah, Section B is
Sorry,
quite,
yes,
quite,
yes,
yeah, Section B is quite unique.
yes, quite unique.
I could count on one hand who might have it, maybe one finger.
It's us.
They just don't, Tom, I've got a couple of little tweaks on,
Yeah, no,
on,
absolutely. I want everybody. to
on,
keep
but nothing serious.
And especially.
You know,
the
a couple of,
explanations.
a number of towns, not a hell of a lot, but a number of towns actually on a flat roofed house set the maximum height as 5 feet below a peak roof house, not the same as, which ours does.
Oh, that's.
And the
interesting.
basis for that is massing, that you're going to get the same massing. Let's say if you went up 30 feet as you would with a peak house if you went up 35,
Yep, all right.
which I
that's-
thought was a very, I had never thought of that, although it makes intuitive sense.
Right, so, all right.
But anyway,
Yeah.
stuff like that. I mean, nothing big.
Yeah, no, and then the other thing is the explanation boxes that go with the warrant articles. I want help with those, to make sure
Okay.
they make sense, because again, it's why we're doing it is probably more important to the townspeople than what we're doing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we do this? I will put this as agenda item number 1 at our next meeting. In the meantime, Tom, I will go through and send you a markup of my comments on it, and Woody will do the same so that when I redistribute it for next meeting, it'll be revised.
Yeah, all right, then I won't circulate the revision that I did to the harbor one right now. I'll wait for everything and do it as a package again.
All
Okay.
right, that's great. And I will start marking it up. I have like notes scribbled in places, but I'll go through and do a more formal markup for you. Okay.
Yeah, so we're getting there. We just I'm still in the learning, the conceptualizing phase, frankly.
I'll follow up with
Which is
Tom
good.
to get something on the calendar to discuss what we discussed here today.
Okay, no, that's great.
Okay.
I appreciate it, guys. And I will, I'm just waiting to find out when my parents are gonna come visit me. So I will propose a set of meeting dates for people once I sort of know when my parents are coming up, so I can avoid having a zoning bylaw working group on that day. Yeah, but other than that, I think we should adjourn at 4:37. Thank you, guys. Like, Cassie knows and Tom knows we had a late meeting last night for Master Plan Implementation Committee, but we're making progress. So slowly.